Hello, I'm Dave Rollman, Communications Director for the San Diego City Council. It's my pleasure to welcome you back to Council Conversations, a series of in-depth chats with members of your City Council. So far, I've sat down with Council President Georgette Gomez and Council members Jennifer Campbell and Monica Montgomery Stepp. Going forward, I plan to talk with more members of the current City Council, as well as some new members starting in December. You might recall that we had an election in early November, and in that election, San Diegans voted in 5 people to take the place of 5 current members who are leaving office next month. Today, I'm joined by Councilmember Mark Kersey. There he is. Mr. Kersey represents District 5, which includes the communities of Rancho Bernardo, Rancho Penasquitos, Scripps Ranch, Carmel Mountain Ranch, Black Mountain Ranch, Sabre Springs, San Pasqual, and Torrey Highlands. Elected to the council way back in 2012, he is currently the chair of the Infrastructure and Active Transportation Committee, and he is among those who will be departing in December, having served the maximum 2 terms. So, Councilmember Kersey, thank you so much for taking the time to talk today.
Hi, Dave. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. So I'm going to start the way I have started with others so far. On a personal level, how have you and your family been managing to get through 2020?
It's been challenging, just like it has been for everybody. Fortunately, everybody's been healthy, which is good. Navigating distance learning for my son has been a challenge for sure. The spring was a bit of a mess. It's definitely better in the fall, but he just started high school, so it's not exactly the ideal start to a high school career for a 14-year-old, now 15, actually just had a birthday last week. So it's definitely been a struggle, but we're persevering.
Yeah, I was going to say you're one of those elected officials who brings us in on social media a little bit to your life. You tweet about baseball quite a bit, and politics certainly beyond San Diego. And you also talk about your family and the distance learning and what's going on with you.
Yeah, it's been interesting. It's the first thing I had to do was upgrade our internet connection because we're doing council meetings and he's got his Zoom school going, and so we needed bigger pipes, more bandwidth. But it's been good, and yeah, social media is interesting. I try not to make it just kind of a series of press releases, but actually put some personal touches on it, and hopefully a little humor here and there. So yeah, it's definitely a unique way of communicating with constituents and even the broader world.
What about professionally? What have been the effects of the pandemic on your work on the council?
Well, it's been tough. I mean, a lot of people have been out of work, which is obviously something that we're mindful of every day. From our perspective, I think the main challenge has been that we work typically in a very person-to-person type environment, right? And that personal interaction and the ability to talk to your colleagues and to constituents and other folks throughout the community, it's normally a very important part of this job. And when we're all kind of in lockdown, either formally or informally, it makes it quite a bit harder, because this really is a personal interaction business. And when you don't have that, it definitely makes things a lot more challenging.
Tell me where your core values come from. What people or events have influenced you over your life?
Well, I mean, my parents obviously would be the biggest ones. And I think among the myriad of lessons that they've taught me over the years, probably the biggest has been to think for myself and to be an independent thinker. And, that's come in handy, throughout my career here. It kind of, it shows itself at different times. But I think I've always had a bit of independence in how I approach governing. And I think that's really the responsible way to look at it, because in this era of heightened partisanship, it's very easy to just go along with what kind of your supporters and everybody who helped get you elected wants you to do, and frankly, that's the easy thing to do as well. And the harder thing is to sometimes tell people, hey, I appreciate your support, but I don't agree with you all the time. And part of the reason the voters elect me is to, use my independent judgment and make the best decisions that I can. And if enough of you disagree with those, you can vote me out when I run for re-election. And so that's how I've tried to approach it. And I think that that's been something that I got from my parents pretty early on.
It seems like it was about 100 years ago that you were elected now, because the way time is going, especially over the last 9-10 months or so. But remind us what you were doing before that and what made you run for office in the first place.
So I've got a technology research firm that I started about 17 years ago now, and it really focuses on advanced video technology. It's morphed as the industry and the environment have changed. Primarily what we focus on now is streaming video, but we started off in broadband internet and migrated to advanced video technology, and have kind of settled in with streaming video. Pretty much everybody's familiar with cord cutting and Netflix and Amazon Prime and all that, and so that's what we focus on. And when my predecessor ran for mayor 8.5, 9 years ago, when he declared, I'd always been interested in politics and had been a supporter and a activist and a donor and things like that. And it just seemed like a good time. My business was pretty stable, and had always been interested in government and politics, and it seemed like a good time to throw my hat in the ring. And so got in early and got some good support and raised some good money, and wound up clearing the field and ran unopposed, which was really the only way to go. Anytime a first-time candidate comes up to me and asks for my advice, my first piece of advice is run unopposed. It's so much easier. They rarely take it though. I don't know why not. Which I believe we figured out at the time was the first time since World War II that a non-incumbent candidate had run unopposed in the city. So that was certainly a nice way to enter city politics there.
Yeah, you must have some kind of secret sauce for clearing the field like that. How did you manage to do that?
I think it was a combination of starting early, having some good relationships and getting a lot of that early support, probably a little bit of luck, and also that, obviously the demographics of the city and my district here in particular were quite a bit different 8 years ago than they are today. Back then it was a safe Republican seat, and so once you had sewn it up on the Republican side, there wasn't really much issue with the Democrats putting up somebody, because it didn't make sense for them to, right? I mean, when I was elected, the district was plus 12 Republican and had gone for Meg Whitman 2 years before by 20 points over Jerry Brown, and that seems like a lifetime ago. I mean, it's just a completely different environment right now.
I was working as a journalist when you were elected, and I remember a lot of talk coming from you about infrastructure, like it was some big bowl of ice cream smothered in chocolate sauce. First, what is infrastructure, and why was it so important to you?
Well, infrastructure is, a combination of roads and sidewalks and fire stations and parks and libraries, basically any piece of, tangible physical property that the city owns and maintains, and our constituents depend on to one degree or another. And the reason I decided to focus on it was, first of all, because when I was out talking to voters when I was running, it was by far the biggest complaint that I heard from people. I mean, principally, when are you going to repave my street? But more than that, I mean, why is the roof at the local library not in good shape? Why are our firefighters working in suboptimal conditions in a fire station that was built 40 years ago and hasn't been upgraded at all since then? So it was a combination of things, and then sidewalks being in bad shape, people tripping and falling and hurting themselves, and that was by far the biggest complaint that I heard from people, and one that frankly I shared myself. And so I certainly seized upon that as something that was an issue that had been neglected by prior city leaders. Partially, I think, because we had gone through the fiscal crisis, and then partially just because infrastructure to a lot of people just isn't very exciting, which I get. I disagree with, but I get. And so I think it was a combination of those things that led me to focus on it, and got into office and worked with our council president at the time, Todd Gloria, who looks like he's going to be our next mayor. And he was very interested in infrastructure as well. And so convinced him that we should create a committee on the council that was specifically devoted to infrastructure, which we had never had before, which he was very much into. And so that was, I believe, the first, or certainly one of the first votes I took, was to create this committee. And it wasn't that creating a committee was going to solve the problem by itself. I mean, it never does, right? But what it did do was it created some policy oversight that previously hadn't been there. And I think that's really what we were lacking, at least at the council level, was any kind of focus on this as an issue of concern. And so what it led us to do was to create a really detailed work plan as to what we wanted to accomplish. We went out and worked with city staff and operations folks and got the city's first ever multi-year infrastructure investment plan created. And we've had a couple of different titles for it over the years, but it's essentially a roadmap for, what are we going to do over the next 5 years, similar to the 5-year fiscal outlook that we have, but specifically for infrastructure. How big is the problem today? What is it going to look like over the next 5 years? And how are we going to actually close the gap? Because what we knew was that the multi-billion-dollar backlog of projects that we were facing had not been created overnight. And so we certainly weren't going to solve it overnight. And the reality was even if you dumped $1 billion on the city, we couldn't effectively spend that money because we just weren't set up to. And so that was all part of the process that had to be reformed. But it really started with changing the mindset and the focus and bringing attention to an issue that had just been had been long neglected.
Did you have other priorities beyond infrastructure that you wanted to tackle?
That was the big one, but secondarily was our local economy, and particularly our small businesses. As a small business owner myself, I was particularly attuned to this issue and how the city could better work with and support our small businesses. I mean, the government by itself is not going to create private sector job growth. It's just not, right? But what it can do is put into place mechanisms by which it's easier to do business here in San Diego. And we know that the overwhelming majority of our employers are small businesses. And so, they have very different needs sometimes than large employers. And so figuring out what those needs are, figuring out how we can do better with, a lot of the red tape that people are up against, when just doing, what should be very simple tasks like applying for permits for various things. We heard a lot of complaints from people as to how the city could do better. And, 8 years later, I think we've done some of that. There's obviously always still more work to be done, just like there clearly is with infrastructure. And so that's why I became an early champion for things like open data and, again, bringing more city services online because there was just so much opportunity there that we weren't taking advantage of. And, we have people, constituents, people we represent who are very used to utilizing technology, and then they'd interact with the government and it would be like we were in the 1950s.
On the other side of it, and I think the pandemic has exposed that there are pockets of this city where there are families that don't have the access, the broadband access. And I think some members of council and the mayor, there was some money in the budget put away to try to bridge the digital divide. I know that's happening right now.
That's very important because you're exactly right. I mean, that is something where I'm not sure that the digital divide as an issue has ever been more important than it is right now. My personal experience with the distance learning has shown that having those capabilities, which a lot of us take for granted, an internet connection in an iPad or a Chromebook, there are plenty of families in town who don't have those. And the schools, they try to get some of those out. I mean, a lot of them have Chromebooks available for kids to borrow. But I've been happy to see that we at the city have stepped up and made some of our libraries available, with both computers and Chromebooks that can be checked out, as well as the outdoor Wi-Fi patios that we've installed at some of our libraries. Frankly, I wish some of our schools would do more of that because we're kind of recreating the school experience in our libraries, which seems, frankly, like it shouldn't be necessary. I mean, we're happy to do it, but frankly, I wish the schools themselves were doing that. But putting that aside, I think that the digital divide, it is real, and we need to do more to close it.
Now, during your 8-year tenure, can you tell me if you evolved in any certain ways? And I'm talking about, priorities, which we've already just been discussing, or maybe just your opinions on what San Diego needs, or just as you personally have evolved during that time?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I would say there's been an evolution over time for sure. I would say that, when I got into office as a small business owner, and you hear candidates talk about this kind of stuff all the time, that I'm going to get in there and we're going to run government like a business. And what you quickly realize is that it's not practical, and it's not very realistic, because there's just a number of factors that prevent it. I mean, first of all, government doesn't really produce, goods that it's selling at a profit, right? So as soon as you take that profit incentive out, it's a completely different ballgame. And so you really have to think about, okay, what can I do as a small business guy to take principles that I've learned for how things could run better, and impart those into government. And that's where reducing some of the red tape and some of that has come into play. And so that's been one thing. And on other things, I'd say that I was obviously a Republican when I got in, and I'm an independent now. And so that's been an evolution. I don't really feel like my philosophy has changed all that much. I mean, I think I'm pretty much the same guy that I was when I was elected. I mean, I've always been pretty much a centrist kind of guy. Generally more center-right, but sometimes center-left, depending on the issue. And, it's unfortunately, we've seen the national politics go the way that they have, and that kind of, played a big role in me becoming an independent. And, I'm pretty comfortable being an independent. So, it's been a good evolution. But, it obviously, I took some heat for it, and that's okay, because, that's, we all take heat for various things when we're in public office. But, I think it was the right move for me personally.
Yeah, and that kind of heat comes with the territory whenever that happens. We've seen it with other people, so you certainly weren't alone there.
Yeah.
And now at the end of this part of your journey, if you could snap your fingers and change something about City Hall or San Diego in general, what would that be?
That's a good question. I think one of the frustrations as a council member that you don't really appreciate until you actually get in and are working on a daily basis is that your constituents they kind of treat you like you're the mayor of your district, right? That you have the capability to pave any road that you want to pave, or to redo any park that you want to. And, it's very much an education process to help people understand that, look, I've got 8 colleagues I have to work with. I've got the mayor I have to work with. I've got the COO. There's the city attorney. There's all these other people that are also part of the process. We've got finite resources, and there's a limit to what we can do. Now, obviously, we're all working to make our districts as good as we possibly can, but there is a certain amount of limitation to that. And so what you find is that there's an expectation from your constituents that doesn't necessarily match up to what you're able to really accomplish on a day-to-day basis. Part of the issue is that obviously the city workers themselves report to the mayor, through their various chains of command, but they report to the mayor, not to the council. And so, your ability to get things done for your district is based on your ability to forge partnerships with your colleagues when needed, and also relationships with the bureaucracy and the people in ops to hopefully get things done. And I think we've done a pretty good job of that in my office, but it can be challenging, because ultimately, when it comes down to it, they report up to the mayor, not to us.
And here's a question that I'm asking all council members. Who is an unsung hero at City Hall, or maybe out in the community? Who doesn't get enough credit for what they do?
Well, this one's easy. This is Liz Mayland. It's, probably none of my constituents, or, maybe a handful, know who Liz Mayland is, but she's really the glue that keeps the whole place operating and working in any kind of efficient way. She's been at the city for a long time, and Sadly, I think she's going to retire here in the not too distant future, but she's she's fantastic to work with. I mean, she and her team are just so professional. And when you look at everything that they're in charge of doing, from running the council meetings, which is the most obvious thing, but maintaining the city archives, administering elections, all the paperwork. I mean, just mountains and mountains of paperwork. She's just so good at it, and it's not just it's not just me saying that. When I was involved in the League of Cities and I talked to other people around the state, she has a reputation up and down the state within that city clerk community as being the best in the business, and it's been such a pleasure to work with her because she's just so knowledgeable. But just so friendly and down to earth and easy to work with, and always, trying to figure out how to help if she can. And I can tell you that on the administrative side of things and just trying to deal with all the requirements and just all the things that we deal with, she's just a rock star, right? She's just so good at what she does.
Looking forward another month or so, there are going to be 5 new council members taking office for the first time. What is your best advice for them as they come in and get settled?
Well, I think the most important thing in this business is relationships, and forging those relationships early, getting to know people before you need something, right? Building those relationships, hopefully establishing a level of trust. And when you've got a majority of the council coming in brand new, I don't know how well they all know each other right now, but they're going to get to know each other pretty quickly. And, you combine that with a new mayor, who obviously we all know, he's assuming it's Todd, he's been around. But even if it were Barbara, either way, right, they know the building. So that part of it is going to be something that is very important to them, is getting to know each other, getting to know what their priorities are, what their values are, what they're trying to accomplish in office. That is something that I think is very important, because you never want your first call to someone to be when you need something, right? I mean, it's much better if you've got a level of trust, and let them know that if you can help them with some of their priorities, things where you have shared interests, that you're happy to do that. I think that's the best way to go about it. And also to not assume that you have all the answers. We all come into office with our priorities, which is great. But the thing about this is that you're only one person of 9. And so you need to build coalitions, and those, I think we're seeing, based on the election results, those aren't going to be based on party. Those are going to be based on how people can come together and find common ground on an issue by issue basis, neighborhood by neighborhood maybe. And that is going to be very important for people. And for a majority of the council to be brand new, and a new mayor, it's going to be interesting to watch. It's going to be very interesting to see just how people navigate that, especially in the middle of a pandemic, right? I mean, if at the time when all of this is taking place with this transition, we're still having all our meetings via Zoom, that's going to be a much harder thing to do, right? And so from that standpoint, I don't envy our successors, because building new relationships is, it's always a challenge, but when you can't do it face to face, that's going to be a lot harder. So, hopefully we'll get a vaccine and we'll get things going, and people can start meeting in person again. But I think that's the biggest thing.
Is there anything else you'd like to mention that we haven't talked about your tenure on the city council?
I think the other big, very important thing that I guess it probably seems obvious, but it really is very important, is to surround yourself with a good staff. The people you hire are going to make or break whether you're going to succeed or not. I've been fortunate that throughout my 8 years, I've had a great staff around me the entire time, and people who really, when I first got in, they knew City Hall. A lot of them had come from the Sanders administration, and so they knew a lot of things that I would have never ever had a prayer of knowing. And that kind of experience is invaluable in hitting the ground running, particularly because our transition period is so brief, right? I mean, people got elected this week and then they're going to take office in 4.5 or 5 weeks. And so there's not a lot of time in there to learn. So having a good staff, surrounding yourself with smart people, taking their advice is going to be something that's really, really valuable. And get a good scheduler. A good scheduler is so critical because pandemic, our schedules aren't as busy as they were before. But having someone who can manage all the requests that come in, because there are so many that do, and keep you out of trouble and keep you on time, that is so important to this job.
All right. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to chat with me today.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. And Dave, thanks for what you're doing here. Really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. I've been speaking to City Council member Mark Kersey, and I'll be back soon with the next segment of this conversation series. Until then, please stay safe, stay sane, and goodbye for now.